we're going to talk about the relationship between the watershed or the catchment and the stream. I might have to change that word in here. Streams, floodplains, and the riparian areas are all interrelated. But basically, a river does two things. It transports water and it transports sediment. Everything else out there is gravy. So what we're going to concentrate on is this water and sediment relationship. What we're going to have to quit doing is looking at our stream as that little narrow thread of water out there. You need to look at this whole floodplain area out there and look at all the relationships that go on. From that floodplain and the stream out there, we get our erosion control, the water quality, wonderful habitat, a great place to go hunting and fishing. But like Steve alluded to, we store lots and lots of water out there in that floodplain out there. Not only that, when we have a good floodplain with all the good riparian vegetation, it slows the water down as it comes through that system, and it provides us some good flood protection out there. Here's the term that Sky talked about, fluvial geomorphology. It's the study of the form and the shape of stream channels, which are created naturally as a result of the water and the sediment that they transport. When we go out and start looking at our streams and we're trying to judge them, we have to understand what their potential is out there. And the things we look at is the natural vegetation that comes back into it. Then we look at the channel shape where we have very little influence or impact by humans. However, some streams have come in and people have already done something to them to such an extent that they will never ever go back to a natural condition out there. And so when we look at that, we only have a certain capability that stream will ever get back to. It will never reach its full potential out there. Steve talked about it a little bit, but we have different types of streams in here, and the different stream types will have different potentials. A perennial stream, one that flows mostly year-round. We have an intermittent stream, which flows after storm events, but it also has a connection to the groundwater out there, and it'll flow for a pretty good long period. Then we have the ephemeral streams that only flow after a storm event and have no connection to the groundwater. And down here in South Texas in the Nueces watershed, we have a lot of streams in here that we have their perennial streams flowing along, and then they'll hit some sort of geological formation, and them suckers will go underground on us. Then they hit another geological formation, and then they come back up out of the ground. But what you need to understand is this area right in here where it goes underground is going to have a complete different potential than where we have the perennial stream out there. So these things you're going to have to start thinking about when we're starting to judge where we can get them back on a stream system. Stream banks and watershed erosions are natural processes. It's been going on since day one, and it's going to go on forever. And streams are very, very dynamic. As things change out there, they're going to always be changing. But what they're trying to do is reach a dynamic equilibrium where they have that water and that sediment transport balanced out there. They're always going to try to change. If we change something in the watershed, it'll make an adjustment. If we change something in the stream, it'll make an adjustment out there. But it's always trying to reach that equilibrium out there. And whenever we make changes, that stream is always going to try to fix itself out there. But a lot of times, we may not be very happy with the way it goes about fixing itself, because it may be widening a floodplain, and if you got a house or a road sitting right there while it's going through that process, you're going to be pretty much unhappy if your house is falling in. Some of the things that influence channel pattern out there is the width, depth, velocity, the discharge. How steep is that channel slope? What type of materials and how rough is the bed out there? How much sediment do we have? And how big is that sediment? The bigger the sediment, the harder it is for that stream to move it. One of the things that everybody hears about is that big 100-year flood event out there. FEMA talks about it, you always hear it on the news. Somebody's getting flooded out here on these streams. But what we want to talk about today is what we call bank full discharge. If you can imagine, we have a little channel right here, and normally you see it, you got a base flow in here. But what we're looking for is when this channel comes up and starts spreading out over the floodplain. It comes up, spreads out. That's what we call bank full. And this bank full discharge is somewhere between a 1 and a 2-year event, usually averaging about a year and a half overall. And that discharge is that carries more water and more sediment through that stream system over a long period of time than that big 100-year event carries, because it only happens for a very short period of time.
Like every 5 years.
Actually, if we want to talk about a 100-year event, that's always been one of my pet peeves, is it's actually a 1% chance every year. So it's kind of just, how lucky do you feel? We need to change that, because people are like, well, it happened last year. I got, 99 more years before that's going to happen. Yeah. You can get a whole series of those in there, but some of those numbers they play with. So you really need to be talking about percent chance is really what I'd like to get it changed to. So yeah, I agree with you. We can get some of those right, just one bang bang right back to back on you. But anyway, this area out in here, when it gets up and gets out there, we call that the active floodplain out there. And during the event out here, all your energy stays in that channel right there. And when you get the water flowing out over the floodplain, the velocities drop out there. They get real slow, and that's when we start getting that deposition of sediment out there. And our water tables that Steve talked about, that sponge goes back and forth between that channel out there. But whenever we get the big flows out there, then that water will go down into the floodplain out there, and it will seep down into that water table and will raise the water table up on us. So that's what we're looking for during those flood events, a recharge of the water table. Here's a little channel up close to Carroll where I used to work, but if you'll notice, we're in here at base flow, but you'll see this channel come up, and we got very good floodplains out there. Remember that little wire right there? And this is what that same channel looks like at bank full discharge. It is just now getting out to get over the floodplain. But don't be confused in all cases between bank full and top of a bank, because we have a lot of channels that have cut down, and now bank full discharge is down in the bottom of the channel, and your big storm events are now all contained within that channel, and now we have lots of energy in there, and it's going to start causing us lots of problems in that. And when the channel down cuts, our water table also goes down. So we lose all this storage that we used to have up here. All we end up with is what's down here in the bottom now.
Just define exactly where you determine the water table.
Well, the water table, if you come out here and you start boring down in here and you get a hole, you'll start finding free water in that hole. And that's usually where we're finding that water table. Yes, and there's going to be an exchange of water between the water table and these channels through the banks in there. But everything goes by gravity is basically what's driving everything. So when you had the bottom up here, it would always hold water down here. But now that we've dropped the channel, now gravity forces brings that water back down to the bottom. So we'll no longer be able to hold that water table up here. And these may be, you know, perched water tables within the channel. We're not talking the, you know, the big aquifers and things like that. However, in a lot of cases, these areas may actually recharge aquifers.
Well, I didn't catch what a down cut is.
A down cutting, see if we can back up here. See, if you have a channel like this, and this is where we have the bank full discharge right here. And this is the active floodplain. And we could get something coming through the system like a head cut, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But for some reason, our channel cuts down like that. And whenever it cuts down, then the water table falls. Yes, ma'am.
Well, most streams have a natural inclination to down cut till they hit an equilibrium, and then they start moving sideways, like the Grand Canyon is still down cutting.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I think it's a matter of assessing whether that stream is still down cutting before it starts meandering.
Yes. And I'll get into a little bit more about that, the channel evolution and things like that here in a little bit. We're trying to kind of build up to some of that. I want to feed you the whole call at one time. I want to give you pieces of it. Okay, this is another little channel up there just north of Terrell. And this channel is flowing at bank full right now. I know it doesn't look like it, but there's a bunch of blood weeds and stuff out there about 8 foot tall. So the natural ground is actually right there. Immediately downstream from that was this bridge, and you see how all this turbulence right here? There was actually a head cut coming up this bridge right here. 2 days after I took the picture, the bridge did go out.
Interesting. Wow.
Now, I've moved just downstream from that bridge, and that same elevation that I told you was where the floodplain was, natural ground was right there at that elevation. But with that same discharge now, you can see that we are down well within that channel. So now when you get those larger storm events, it's going to start doing the widening process that you're talking about. Cuts down, starts the widening in there until it rebuilds a new floodplain because we have way too much energy. In the other system, the water spread out and kept all the energy out of the floodplains. Now that we've kind of determined what the bank full width, and we measure those in the riffle section, at bank full, we've determined how wide the channel is. Now we can start making some predictions of the geometry and the shape of that channel out there. The meander wavelength out there, that's kind of that sine wave, is 10 to 14 times bank full width. We normally have our pools at 5 to 7 times bank full widths. Radius of curvature, that's how sharp this channel bend is 2 to 3 times bank full width. And sinuosity out here is inversely proportional to slope, which means that if you're up in the headwaters areas, like up in the Rocky Mountains, you see them streams coming out of those mountains up there, those things are relatively straight. But when you get down into the valleys where the grades are very flat, then that channel wants to meander all over the valley. And they've gone in and done a bunch of measurements on a bunch of stream channels, and this is width, and you can see that meander wavelength right in there fits very well into that graph. Also, the radius of curvature fits in there. Even when there are no confining boundaries out there, the channels still want to meander. This is the Gulf Stream out in the Atlantic. This is a lake up in Colorado where you have cold water coming into the lake, and you can see how it sets up that meander pattern in that lake with nothing in there to confine it. However, when we come in and we try to straighten the channel out and confine it, it still wants to meander. This is the Walla Walla River in 1964.
That looks like Houston.
Can you imagine what was going through the mind of that engineer when he woke up the next morning and saw that happen to his nice channel job out there? He's going, what did they not teach me at the university? you actually look, you can actually see some remnants of the old channel that was kind of meandering through there.
Oh, yeah.
Now, our streams need a certain amount of area out there to operate out there. And when we talk about belt width, that is the area from the outside of those meanders. They need that area to develop those meander patterns. Now, a while ago we talked about the active floodplain. You see this green area right in here? That's that active floodplain where it gets up, bank full, and starts spreading out right there. You see these kind of light tan kind of areas right in through there? That's what I call the abandoned floodplain. During your larger events, the 5-10-year event or something, floodwaters will get out over there. There's another elevation right in here, and that's kind of one of our first terraces out there, and only during some big storm is that water ever going to get out there. Then we have another area out here, and this is our higher terrace out there, and water will probably never ever get back up there during any flood event. But this river was actually at that elevation at one time. This was the active floodplain. And then it cut down, active, abandoned. Cut down again, and it cut down again. So that river has gone through several down cuts over its life out there. This is out in West Texas. There's the active floodplain, abandoned floodplain, and if you look back in here, you see the difference in elevations. We have some terraces out there. These terraces, you can find them all over Texas, but you have to look real hard at a lot of areas because we have so much rainfall that a lot of times those distinct shells have worn away with erosion, but they are there. I used to think water just kind of flowed just kind of down the river, you know, and everything was kind of happy-go-lucky there. But in reality, what's happening is these rivers set up two corkscrew patterns in the river. And when they're going through the riffle section, the straight section, these corkscrew patterns are opposing each other. And if you look real close out into the center out there, you'll see some upwelling going on. And Steve mentioned to me the other night, have you ever noticed that it's actually a little higher maybe out there in the middle? And it's because those upwelling currents are coming together. But as they come out of the riffles and they go into the bends, then one of those currents become dominant. And when it does, it will eat on these outside banks right here, and that's our erosion zone. And then it goes through the next riffle, it carries the sediment down, and then as it comes around, then that current picks up and deposits that sediment on this area right here called the point bar. And that's how these channels go in, cut out the banks, and make those detrimental features. Remember the Walla Walla River, how straight it is up there? Hit one other thing right here. I'm an engineer, so I got to throw out one little equation for you. Shear stress right here. Shear stress is the amount of energy that's being applied to those banks by that water out there. And the big component of it is the slope. In other words, the steeper the slope gets, the more shear stress you have. And when you have a straight channel like this, you're going to find areas in there where the water surface slope increases. And where that happens, then that channel is going to start eating on these banks right here. It's going to start cutting on this bank and on that bank over there. And then what it's going to do, as it cuts out, it develops that meander pattern right there until it gets where the channel is long enough, and then that water surface slope becomes uniform. And then that, when it reaches that, then that's where it has reached that dynamic equilibrium that we're looking for. Here's a little short movie clip. We got a little straight channel coming through here. And I want you to notice that this thing is going to start eating out, starting to develop the meanders, and watch how these meanders, the bends, actually start migrating downstream. You see how it starts developing point bars in there. It starts getting wider and wider, readjusting the meander pattern in there. You'll notice that this is now an abandoned floodplain, and our active floodplain is down here on this point bar now. It's just the process it wants to go through. It's coming in and dissipating its energy in there by increasing its flow. There is a classification system that was developed by a fellow by the name of Dave Roskin, and this allows you to go in and talk about stream channels just about like you talk about livestock, the cows. You talk about the different breeds, Angus, Hereford, Brainerd, Jerseys, Holsteins. It's our same way we communicate about stream channels out here. But we look at single and multiple thread channels. We talk about entrenchment ratios, which is how much floodplain do we have out there. We look at our width-depth ratio, and I'll get into a little bit more of that. Sinuosity. We look at our bed materials out here, as well as the slope of the channel. Entrenchment, if we look at bankful width in here on a channel, and we go up and measure twice the elevation of this is deep right here, and measure the width of that floodplain in there, then that gives us a ratio that we call the entrenchment out there. In these very narrow channels in here, all that energy is going to be contained in that valley right there. But if we get over to these channels over here that have very, very wide floodplains, and then our energy is dissipated out on the floodplain and not in those channels in there. If you find a channel that has a nice parabolic shape, that probably means that you have some issues out there, because a channel naturally wants to be trapezoidal in shape. On this little channel here, we've had a lot of foot traffic coming through here, and you can see, because of all those issues, it's kind of reached a parabolic shape in there. In the background, where there's no traffic, it's more of a trapezoidal shape. This channel here has a trapezoidal shape to it. This channel of this shape is the most efficient channel that you can have at transporting water and sediment. This channel evolved into this narrow channel over a long period of time with these almost vertical banks out there. It just didn't happen overnight. It took a long time for it to get there. What we do is we measure the width of that channel at bankful, we determine what the average depth is, and we get our width-depth ratio. A channel like this probably has a width-depth ratio of 8 to 10, something like that. Highly efficient channel. This channel is on Nueces. Anything kind of jump out at you at the shape of the channel bed? Kind of parabolic in shape, isn't it? We actually I worked on a project on this, and this channel has a width-depth ratio of 130. When it gets with a width-depth ratio like that, it does not have any energy to transport the sediment. All the sediment drops out into the channel. That water out there is very shallow, which means that it starts getting hot. It's kind of like walking down a sauna, through a sauna out there. And when that happens, your oxygen drops to almost nothing out there. We kicked rocks for a mile in that channel, found 2 bugs and 0 fish. It's just like a desert in there. Sinuosity. What we do is we look at the valley length. Then we look at the length of the stream. Then we take the length of the stream, divide it by the valley width, and we get a sinuosity. In this case, it's a 1.9. That's a real nice sinuous stream. What about this one? Both of them are the same length, so you have a ratio of 1. Can you see all those nice rollover tracks in there where somebody kind of went in and straightened that up? Think it's going to stay like that? The next thing we want to talk about is the slope or the gradient of the channel. And what you do is you look at the elevation on the upper and the lower end, the length of the stream, multiply it times 100, And that gives us a gradient in there. In this little channel here, we got 6 foot of fall, 560 foot, and it gives us a gradient of 1.1%. Over here, same elevation difference, but now the channel is only 400 foot, and so now we have a gradient of 1.5%. And what that means is this channel has a lot more energy in it than this channel over here. So it's going to have something here to help it dissipate that energy. If it doesn't, then it's going to have to start meandering more until it gets where that energy and that water and sediment are all balanced. When we talk about our streams in here, they are kind of different sections out here. What we have is the headwater part of your streams back up here, and those are usually the areas that supply the most sediment to the system. Up there, highly erosive type areas. Then we have another section in here, what we call our transfer zones. Those are the areas where that water and sediment basically move right through the valley. Then we get down and we get into our depositional zones. And that's where those channels start meandering and we get all of our sediment dropped out in those areas right there. We have to also look at valley types. So we'll know what type of potential we have on our streams out there. Can you ever imagine a nice meandering channel being in the bottom of that valley right there? It's just not going to happen. It's got boundaries in there and it can't meander. In this channel here, we've got a nice V-shaped valley, so you would also never expect to see that nice meandering channel in there. And this is probably one of those channels that's just a transfer zone where the water and sediment basically just move through the system. However, in this valley, you notice it's broad and flat, low gradient. You can see where that channel is meandering all over that valley out there. And we're getting all the deposition in here. And if you saw a channel in here that was real narrow and deep, cut right through that valley, you'd say something is probably not right, because that's not what you expect to see in that valley. However, when you go from one end of the stream to another, they are not all going to be the same stream type due to gradients, valley types, evolutionary things that's going on, head cuts in the system. So you're not going to be able to go out here and say this stream is that stream type, because things are always changing out there. And when we know what a stream type is here, we can start looking at some management interpretations on this. One of the things we talk about is sensitivity to disturbance. If we take one of these A2 stream types, which are basically those real steep streams up in the mountains or the headwaters that have the big boulders in it, you can add a fire hose into that thing and it's not going to have an impact on that stream. And vegetation over here has very little impact because the big boulders are dissipating the energy. However, when we get down into some of our C channels and E channels in these broad valleys, they are very, very sensitive to disturbance out there. And they also, vegetation is very important to those stream systems out there. If you lose the vegetation in those stream systems, you're basically going to lose that stream type that you're looking for out there. When we talk about a channel being stable, we can define it as a stream in the present climatic condition that has a stable dimension, pattern, and profile, such that over time the channel features are maintained and the stream system neither degrades, that's build up in the valley, or neither degrades, cuts down. What I didn't say was it was stuck in one place. This channel can also still move around across the valley, but it just maintains those features in there. It's still going to erode, and it's still going to move around. In 1955, this fellow by name came up with this relationship. And if there's anything you can take away today, I would like for you to try to remember this relationship right here. Because this will be a relationship you can use to give you some guidance on how can I manage my stream out there? On this side of this scale over here, we have our discharge in our stream. Up here, we have our channel slope. On this side of the scale, we have our sediment load and our sediment supply, or size on it. If we do something out here that changes the discharge in our stream system, it's going to cause this scale to tip down. And whenever it tips down, if you look at this little arrow here, it's going to swing over this direction right here, and that channel is going to degrade. It's going to cut down, or if it's on bedrock, it's going to widen out. If we change the amount of sediment in there, increase it over here, that's going to cause this scale to go down this way, and it's going to cause the channel to A-grade, to build up out there, because it does not have enough energy now to move that sediment through the system. If we increase the slope in the channel by straightening it out, again, drop down, it's going to cause that channel to degrade. Larger sediment is going to cause it to A-grade. So it's kind of a balancing act out there in this stream when we make changes out here. Not only does this represent the stream, this also represents the watershed. And it all starts with the raindrop. Steve talked about our water catchment out there a while ago. And when that raindrop hits out there, it's either going to go in the ground or run off. Driving in, y'all grow lots of grass like this around here, don't you? If you can imagine, if you're a raindrop and you fall into that grass right there, it's going to be a pretty good job just to make it down to the ground. When you get down to the ground, it's going to be hard to even run out of that. And on top of that, it's going to be hard to carry any sediment with you. So this is going to be what you call your catchment. Water here, most of it's going to go on the ground, very little is going to run off. In reality, most of our water catchments are going to look like this. Good grass, water's going to run into the ground, little going to run off. However, I do come from Parker County, the cutting horse capital of the world. Everybody up there likes to have 18 horses on 10 acres. On this place right here, the biggest thing I saw out there in that pasture was a golf ball. But you can imagine when that raindrop hits that ground right there, the first thing it's going to want to do is start running off. And when it runs off, it's going to start carrying sediment with it. And when it starts dropping off that hill, we start forming those gullies. More sediment, more runoff. One small place in a big watershed may not have a big impact on a stream. But if you have a lot of this going on, then it will have a major impact on your stream system. Everybody kind of likes to eat, wear nice cotton clothes, so we're going to have to do some farming out there. And so when we go in and do a good job out here, building terraces and buffers and filter strips, we still kind of come up with a catchment for cropland. However, when we do a bad job, we get lots of water and lots of sediment running off of that, and it all ends up right down there in our creeks. And we have a lot of farmland out there that's doing some of that. Also, in our country, we're getting a lot of this urbanization stuff going on. This was a nice rangeland pasture right there. When it's in this stage of development right here, we get a big increase in the discharge and we get a big increase in sediment. When we get to this point out here, the discharge is even greater, but we get very little sediment. So what have we done or set our stream systems up to do? Remember Lane's relationship? Added water, took away the sediment. Our stream systems are wanting to degrade or cut down. And believe me, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, then around Austin, San Antonio, all those areas have lots of issues with their stream channels. When you have a watershed right after the rainfall event starts, you're gonna start getting runoff out there. And you're going to get a very high peak discharge. And after it quits raining, then it's gonna fall off very quick, and then there will be nothing coming off there. But when you have a catchment, it's gonna take a lot longer for any water to start running off. Your peaks are gonna be a lot lower, and the rainfall, the runoff is gonna occur over a longer period of time out there. And you can see that that's gonna have a big impact on our stream systems out there. I run a little average watershed for Parker County up there with 300 acres and a 10-year return event. And I compared it to a good, excellent grass catchment versus a poor grass watershed out there. And by having a catchment out there, we reduced the peak discharge by 49%. We reduced the total amount of runoff by 32%. And we increased infiltration by 225%. So you can see the difference between a watershed and a catchment has a big impact out there. And what can you do with all that extra water that you infiltrated? And we grow some better grass out there. We talked about changes in slope. And one of the changes we look at that's very dynamic out there are these head cuts. Water comes over, it's like a little waterfall, and then it heats out underneath down here, and then it'll fall off. Heat out some more, fall off. And these things are kind of like zippers going right back up our stream channels. Even when you have wonderful riparian vegetation, these head cuts will still go right up the system. This is one down in Leon Creek in San Antonio, and this material is kind of sandy alluvial, and that thing is shooting right up that stream channel right there. A wonderful little channel up here, but now it's going to down cut and go right up through that valley. Over at Loretta, we have a head cut right here in the system, but if you'll notice, that is solid rock. So that head cut is really not going to have an impact upstream from there. So if you've got rock, it's not that big a deal. This channel has lots of little head cut looking things in it right here, but if you notice, we got some pretty good boulders in that thing. So those boulders actually dissipate that energy, and this is what we call a step pool type stream, and this is a perfectly acceptable system out there. This little area in here, there was a little stream channel, and you can see remnants of it there, that went right down through this valley. Evidently, the landowner decided that, well, that channel was a little hard to cross or something, so they went in and straightened it out and built a waterway right down that valley. What did we do when we took that meandering channel and we built a straight waterway? We increased the grade in that channel, didn't we? And whenever it did that, bam, it cut down, starting down on the lower end of the valley and walked right up that valley. Just to give you a little scale, that little dirt plot right there is about the size of a refrigerator. Everybody likes to have a nice lake on the river. And when we build these dams in here, we've come in and we flattened the slope again on our channel. Here's the same dam, but look what's happened up there above that dam. And we flattened it out, the slope. We dropped all that sediment out in this lake area up here. That's what I always call my balloon painting. What are we going to do with that sediment now out there? But if you'll look, after it fills back up, the shape of that channel right there is roughly what's the shape of the channel downstream. Here's another way to flatten the grade. They come in here and built the road and stuck a couple of culverts on it. And all this sediment right in here deposited out right there. The only reason there's a channel right there is they've been in there with a bulldozer or a front end loader digging that stuff out so the water can even get to their pipes anymore. But those were creative fellows out there, and they figured out how they could go in and utilize that sediment out there. They kind of camouflage it into the concrete out there. Another way that we can add a lot of sediment to the system is out of these cut banks that you were talking about. And when you need some of them out there, but when you have mile after mile after mile of cut banks, all this sediment ends up down here in the stream. And what it will do is find a weak lens in that bank, it'll cut it out, and then that whole bank will fall in. And depending on what type of materials out there, you can increase or actually add a lot more fines in your sediment out there. One of the signs that you're having some issues out there is if you start seeing a lot of these mid-channel bars out there. One of them is not such a big deal, but if you go after bend through there and you start seeing them, then you probably have an issue. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, can we ask questions now?
Yes, ma'am. You can.
With the cut banks, so is it possible to have a stream that where a bank full is at the top of the bank with a cut bank? Is it possible, or will
Yes,
it
ma'am.
always have that eroding?
Well, there are going to be some banks that's always going to be eroding out there. But you can actually have the outside banks of the channel that are so well vegetated that you're not even going to be able to detect any movement in them. You know, I'm kind of going over some of the general processes, but when you get in and start tying the whole system together, we end up with a lot of different ways of looking at stuff out there. You know, we had a guy talk about cypress trees yesterday. Wonderful things for controlling the bank erosion. But you can have banks out here that are, bank full on this channel is very low over here, so this is a high bank. And you're more susceptible on a high bank to getting erosion because you have all that energy trapped over there. But if bank full was right here and it allowed the water to spread out, there's going to be a lot less energy against those banks. And a lot of times when these channels meander, this is going in probably back into, well, it may still get out there, so this could either be like that. I think it's above the abandoned floodplain, but that may be that first terrace that gets under the big floodplains on this one. So there's lots of energy on those high banks over there, and you're really going to have some good veg in there to slow that down. But when we get so much bank erosion going on up and down the stream system like this is on the South Llano, you end up with all these mid-channel bars out there, which means there's more sediment than that channel can transport. So it's dropping it out right there, and when it drops it out, its response is to widen out. This is also on the South Llano. We had a big event there, and this is on the Nueces. And this sediment came down through that floodplain during a high event, just like a lava flow. This is about 4 to 6 feet tall, and you see all those trees out there, it just enveloped those trees. It was like a wave coming down through that valley there. So that tells us that we have lots of sediment issues going on in that channel. When you come into a system, you really need to kind of start doing some homework. You want to get in there and look for relic areas out there so you can identify what the potential is. You want to look for preserves or exclosures, areas that hadn't been disturbed, and see what those channels look like. You want to look at some of your geology to see what type of landforms. You have bedrock, boulders, things like that. We don't have them in Texas yet, but they're starting to work on them, and they're going to be ecological site descriptions. And that's going to take these different riparian areas and it's going to describe them to you and what they should be and what different types of evolutionary scenarios they'll go through. Look for historical photographs out there. Man, those are a wonderful thing to see what that stream looked like a number of years ago. And if you can find old survey notes, diaries, things like that, look for that. USDA has a lot of hydrology information. We got soil survey books. And then visit with old timers and other people out there that have been around these stream systems a long time to find out what's going on. This is my favorite one to visit there. Those people that have been there on those rivers for a long time, because they can tell you what's going on for several years. Here's the South Llano. We had a project that we were working on. So I was back doing some of my homework. If you can see, look at this bend right here. You can see where that channel was in 1984. By 1995, you can see where the channel had cut across right here and taken out that bend right there. By 2003, it had basically taken out all that material right there and put another bend in that thing. South Lano has lots of sediment in it, so it's actually trying to straighten itself out, to put more energy in it, so it can move that sediment through the system.
Is that characteristic of the whole South Lano?
There's a lot of places in there. You can actually go up to the upper reaches of the South Lano, and it's pretty good. But there's a stretch in there, like through the state park and south through there, that's doing that. And that area right there is between Junction and the state park, where that actual meander is right there. If you actually look down here, you can see where it's doing some more of it. So these old photographs are extremely important, that you can go back and look and tell what's going on in the stream system. We did a class in there, this is close to Temple, on Little Creek, and we were going out and doing one of these PFC classes, and people looked at that stream right there and thought, man, this is a pretty good little creek right there. But if you look at it from the other direction down there, you can actually see where this reach right in here is oversteeping, and it's actually doing a lot of eroding in there. Look at all those roots hanging out right there. And if we went up another couple, 300 yards, this is what the channel looked like. This is what the potential of that stream actually was right there to judge the other channel against. And as you can see, we've got a nice little channel here, water and sediment moving through it. We've got a good floodplain out there, and we're processing all of our sediment. So get out there and look around and find out what the potential for these streams are in your valley types, in your similar type drainage areas. We have lots and lots of beavers up in North Texas, and I think there's some back down in this part of the country, but most of our beavers, they bury back in under the banks. But sometimes you'll get young, stupid teenage beavers, and they'll try to build a dam where they can build a dam, and they'll wash out. But under this process, we want to know, are these beaver dams going to modify the stream channel out there? And if you get some older ones in there that know what they're doing, you can see here where they actually built some nice beaver ponds in here, and they have modified the stream channel. Now, these valleys out here, when you look at your stream, they may have gone through several changes over a long period of time. If you look at this one, this stream right here, no terraces, it can be either a one field, two field, or even three fields over there. Cuts down, fills back up, cuts down, fills back up. You come down here, you may have a couple of terraces. It can be into a one field system, cut down once, twice. It can actually cut down, fill back up, and cut back down again. If you kind of look at it from a three-dimensional standpoint, you can see we've got a valley in here with one field. It cuts down, builds a nice valley back in there. Over here, it's cut way back down to the bedrock, and then it's filled back up, and then recreated basically the same stream channel, but it got there two different ways. This is on Bear Creek, down there close to Junction, and we were out working, doing a survey on it. And if you will notice, right here in this bank, we have a ripple, a glide, and a pool right there in that bank. So this channel that was here was actually up at this elevation, and that was probably bank full at that time. So look around at your banks, and you can find a lot of remnants of old stream channels out there. Sometimes it may be a cross section or just a little piece of a ripple or a pool or something in there, but that tells you what's been going on in that valley for a long period of time.
Is this the same Bear Creek that was illustrated earlier?
No, ma'am.
Different Bear
Different.
Creeks?
Everybody's got a Bear Creek, a Brushy Creek, Muddy Creek.
I asked you about the exposed roots on that, the picture just before the bank is eroding and those trees, and then gradually they're gonna fall over.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that a good thing, just to let that happen?
We'll talk about that in just a little bit.
Could you give some perspective of, are you looking at the bank on this picture, or is the stream going that way?
Well, here's the stream right down here. But if you'll look right in here at the gravel, you see some real fine material right up here at the top. And then there's a gravel layer right in here, and that was actually the old gravel riffle where the channel was. And then it came out of the riffle in here, it goes through a glide, what we call a glide, and then here's the bottom of the pool right there. So it goes from, a stream will have riffles and pool signals. So in this case, that was the riffle, and there's the pool. I've never seen all of it in one deal. I've always seen pieces of riffles or pieces of pools or cross sections, so I was kind of excited to see that. Kind of a weird sort of thing, but I got excited. Now we're going to get into your issue about the channel evolution. A while ago we talked about having a head cut in a system. As this head cut goes up the valley, up above the head cut, you have a nice channel up here that has good access to the floodplain. But as that head cut goes through, the channel cuts down, it widens out, and then it will start depositing sediment down in the bottom once it gets wide enough, and then reform another channel. So here we go, cuts down, cuts down, cuts down, then it starts that widening process. Gets wider and wider and wider until it develops the valley width that it needs in there. But in the meantime, we have lost all that sediment and it's gone downstream. Then what it does is when it gets wide enough, it will start depositing sediment down there that no longer gets moved out during those big flood events. And if you'll remember on Bear Creek, over there on that left bank, that bank came down and then it had a bunch of sediment sloughed right off there at the bottom. And this is the point in time when you can really start doing something to help these streams recover. During that widening process, it's just going to happen. And there's not a lot you can do during that process. But once it reaches here, then things really start happening. We start getting vegetation growing up through here. We get more sediment growing, deposited. And pretty soon, that's that Bear Creek. Channel up here, evolved back down here. But now our water table's back down here at the bottom instead of being back up here. If it's on bedrock, it can't go down. So its only response is to start cutting out. And when it gets wide enough again, all you have is potential left is that little bit of riparian sponge out there, and we have lost all this sediment and all that water storage there. This is kind of what one looks like when it's down to bedrock and it's cut out. And there's a whole bunch of different evolutionary channel sequences depending on what's going on out there, changes in discharge, sediment supplies, and the materials that you're in out there. So what we went over is just one potential process out there. So let's take a look at one. This is on the upside of the little county road. Notice this nice little channel coming in back up through the valley. This is the other side of the county road. This channel you saw earlier, this is what came up to that county road. So we're going to take a little tour downstream. As we go down further, you can start seeing where it starts developing real small point bars. And the valley starting to widen out a little bit. As we go down further, bigger point bars, a wider valley, until it widens out and develops a meander again. And now it can kind of start dissipating the energy and it can start recovering again in there. But now our water table is going to be way down in the bottom. This is kind of the granddaddy of them. This is the North Sulphur River in northeast Texas. I don't know if anybody been up in that part of the world. But the North Sulphur River, back in the early 1900s, they decided they needed to straighten it out so they could get all this forest area out of there and they could farm that country there. And this is a remnant of the old North Sulphur in there. It's probably 50 to 60 foot wide and probably in the neighborhood, I'm guessing 12 to 15 foot deep. Had a 2 to 3 mile wide floodplain down through there. This is what it looks like today. 200 to 300 foot wide, 25 to 30 foot deep out there. And as this thing starts widening out and you build a bridge across it, they or extend these bridges about every 5 years for a period of time there. You notice anything kind of unusual about that column right there?
It's collapsing.
Well, actually, if you'll see it's smooth and then it gets real rough,
Uh-huh.
that's where the channel bottom used to be when they
Right.
put that in,
Right.
okay? Also, you can see over here, it's starting to
Cut away.
cut away at those piers right there. So this thing is still, after all those years, this thing is still widening out. Now, every tributary that comes into this North Sulphur River now is down cutting and widening out. And you can see this thing here is dropping sediment, it's gonna be cutting it out, and look at it going right back up that valley. And it's gonna continue right up to the top of the watershed up there. These isn't a catchment. And it's gonna keep going until it finds something hard, or it actually kind of grades itself out. This guy thought he could come in and put a little rock across there and stop it. It just didn't work. And all this channel meandering and things like that, going through the evolutionary process, isn't a big problem unless that's your house right there. And then it's news at 10. And $1 million plus to fix that. Now here's kind of our little test. Can anybody tell me what that little feature is right there?
Is that an old gravel bar?
No, that's a depositional feature that stream beat. That's bank full. That's a point bar that it developed. There's another little point bar right there. But do you notice anything kind of funny about that channel right there? Isn't that end kind of sharp? Kind of sharp right there, right? The channel wants to have a meander or a radius of curvature of 2 to 3, but that's more like a 1. So what this channel is going to do is take and eat that high bank out right there, and it'll actually take out some of that old point bar right in there until it develops a meander pattern it wants. And probably coming from this direction, it's going to take that feature out. And so it's kind of like making sausage. It goes in there and it's going to tear stuff out, widen everything out, and it's going to make a mess until it goes in there and makes that valley that it wants to have and creates that meander pattern down in the bottom. One of the things that happens is people start having problems with their sediment and discharges and changes in our watershed. So we want to know if our upland watershed is causing us a problem. And so we look at the channel and determine if it's kind of processing that sediment through there. And you remember this channel here, you can see it's doing a pretty nice job. You've seen this one before. We've got a series of mid-channel bars out there, so that tells us we have a problem, something going on in the watershed that we're not able to process all the sediment that it's supplying. And in this case, it's probably coming out of most of the banks up there. You can also get in where some channels have multiple mid-channel bars out there, and that's what we call our braided stream. There can be a whole series of these bars across the channel. In some cases, that may be an issue out there. We just can't move that sediment through the system. However, there are some streams that is the potential for that stream channel. If you're coming out of a high sediment system out there, they got it like up in the north for glaciers, you know, like up in Alaska, and then you hit a flat valley out there, all that sediment's going to come down and hit that valley, and it's going to fall out there because there's not enough grade to move it. So that channel is always moving and depositing sediment all across that valley. So a braided channel would be the potential stream type in that valley. You see these sediment waves out there, that means that channel, this is actually down in the channel, this was up on the floodplain, it is not processing that sediment. So that tells me that our watershed is contributing